Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Morgan Jackson. I'm a postdoc at McGill University associated with the Lyman Museum at McDonald campus. And thank you very much for having me join the SES Virtual Conference 2020. It's nice to be back in SES even if digitally after spending a couple of years away following my grad work there. I'm excited today that you're talking about science communication and getting your research out into the world for the public and more people to know and love. And I'm excited to talk to you about some of the strategies and things that I've been working on and have some experience with through social media over the years. But before we get into that, I want to acknowledge that McGill University is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. McGill honors, recognizes, and respects these nations as their traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today. Now, obviously, the way that we're meeting today is a little bit different and is more of a digital focus, but I want to take you back several years ago to the beginning of my career, actually, and how I launched my career in entomology so far through the University of Guelph. This is me back in 2006. And to take your mind back to what 2006 was like, in 2006, Twitter had less than 10 users. It was still basically just a group text messaging app for the people who would eventually go on to create it. MySpace had 100 million users. Facebook had less than 10 million users, was just barely starting to creep out of the US and out of institutions. And meanwhile, things like iPhones hadn't been invented yet or released. We were still using Blackberries if you had access to data. So at this time, 2006, was when I went on my first entomology field course with the University of Guelph. And that's me there sitting beside the waterfall in Virginia as part of the course in that spring. Now this was a big deal for me. This is how I basically fell in love with entomology, was on this course, learning about it from Drs. Marshall and Otis. And along with all of the other students that year, some of which you may recognize in here. And one of the people who was on that course that year was Dr. Henry Stockwell. And Dr. Stockwell is actually a pediatrician, a medical doctor, and he spent most of his career working in Panama. But he had a love of beetles, particularly weevils, and so he would join us on these field courses at the time and come and share his knowledge and enthusiasm about insects. And so near the end of the course this year in 2006, while we were walking along this mountain stream in Virginia, I was talking to Dr. Stockwell, and he mentioned what he wanted to do in retirement. And I should note that at the time he was in his early 70s, and so he was still thinking further ahead into when he was actually going to retire. But he said when he wanted to retire, what he really wanted to do was to sit on his front porch with his telephone and just have people call him and answer questions about bugs and things of natural history. And I thought at the time, that's a pretty cool plan. I don't know how realistic it is, but it's a pretty cool plan, and it's always stuck with me. And little did Dr. Stockwell know that within a few years of that conversation, we don't have to wait to sit on our porch or wait till retirement to sit there and answer questions on our phones, as now our phones are in our pockets. And with them comes a connection of social networks that connect us to basically every other human on the face of the earth right now. And with that comes a lot of opportunities. So today I want to talk to you about the ways that we can sit on our front porch digitally and share our knowledge and our respect and our enthusiasm about the things that we like, whether that's insects in my case, whether that's the things that you're studying now as grad students, the things you're passionate about outside of grad school, and just about daily life and how we can encourage and better share our experiences with the world. So in Canada, 88% of Canadians own smartphones, which means they're connected to these systems basically at all times. They all have data plans. They can connect to the internet basically anywhere in Canada because we've got very, very good coverage for Wi-Fi and data connection. And many, many Canadians are also on social media, 85% on Facebook, 43% on Instagram, a lesser percentage on Twitter. It's a little still more niche, but still a big connection. And then that last one there, if you're not familiar, is Inaturalist, which is a site we'll talk about a little bit later on. But still 0.1%, still lots and lots of Canadians using that site. And it's for natural history and a social network for natural history observations. But we'll get into that a little bit later. The point here is that many, many Canadians are online and they're very interested in connecting with one another, sharing stories, hearing stories, and learning more about the world around them through the eyes of other Canadians and other individuals around the world. When it comes to science, though, it's also important to recognize that Canadians love science. So this is data from an Ontario Science Centre survey from a couple of years ago. They haven't redone it recently, but this is data from a few years ago. 83% of those surveyed in Canada wanted to know more about science. What's interesting is that most of their scientific knowledge was coming from either school or university, or they were seeking it out in other places, such as books and newspapers and the internet. And what's best of all for us is that they trust scientists and professors, particularly for confirming scientific findings. So if they hear something online or they hear something from a friend, they are more likely to believe it if they can go and prove it from scientists and professors. Maybe that's the people that they took classes from. Maybe that's people that they're finding on social media. What's also interesting is that the country is basically split about 50-50 on who should be putting in the effort, whether it's citizens and community people coming up and learning about science themselves, or whether it's scientists that should be reaching out. Now you'll notice one of the things that's totally missing from this entire list of sources of scientific knowledge is peer-reviewed journals, which is obviously where we have a lot of focus on publishing our things. Obviously nobody outside of us is reading those. So that means that if we want people to actually care about our research and to start using it, we have to start taking it out of the peer-reviewed research articles and journals and start sharing it in other media. And this is a good indication of one way to do that. Social media and social networks are interconnected. They allow you open broadcasting to share the things that you love, the things that you're doing, the things that you're working on, and the things that you think are important for people to know. And you're going to find an audience of people who are interested in that and want to learn from you because they want to know more about science. So when it comes to scientific audiences on Twitter, and I'm going to be focusing on Twitter for the majority of this, not because I think it's the best social network, but it's the one that I have the most experience with, and so I have the most confidence talking about. If you're into Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or YouTube or any of the other dozens of sites available out there right now, I encourage you to take these tips and things, and maybe you can use them in those instances as well. But for most of the conversation today, it'll be revolving around Twitter. Partly because that's where a lot of scientists are hanging out. A couple of years ago, it was guessed that about 30 to 40% of scientists have Twitter accounts, depending on how much they use them. And this is a study from a couple of Canadian evolutionary biologists who you can follow on Twitter as Red Lip Blenny and Emily Darling. And they did a study where they looked at who is following scientists on Twitter. And so you see here that most of the people following it are other scientists. But once you get up to about the 500 to 1,000 follower range, that's when you start pulling in people outside of science, including members of the public, media, and then if you start getting up into the higher tiers there, we see all sorts of industry, outreach personalities, decision makers being politicians. They don't follow scientists at all, basically. But so if you want to get your message out, you need to start getting up into the higher following. So once you get to about 500 to 1,000, that's kind of where you're going to start seeing more uptick from media, members of the public. And once you get over about 1,000 followers, that's when you start getting a little bit more attention from the media. And I can confirm from my own experience that is basically on track. And the more followers you get, the more, people you see, the more people who see your stuff, the more likes, retweets, and the broader your network starts expanding. But what does that mean? So here is some more data from a few years earlier. And so these may have shifted a little bit further to the right, potentially. But how many followers do scientists have? And underneath that 500 follower cutoff is about 75% of all scientists on Twitter. And so if we're hoping that you're starting to get engagement at 500 to 1,000, means you're starting to get into the top 25, the top 10% of scientists on Twitter. So that means you need to be working actively to try and grow your audience and using your skills that you're developing in various other parts of your research training to apply them in this way so that you can start getting beyond just your echo chambers of other people within your discipline. That's important too. I mean, finding people online to communicate with, to commiserate with, to share experiences with, and to share your work with, to get citations, which are still valued within getting jobs and moving up in academic research right now. But if you want to reach out beyond that, we need to start finding strategies to get beyond 500, beyond 1,000 followers. And that can be tough and it takes some time. So I want to share a couple of the things that I generally go along, and then we'll move into some of the things that my experiences have brought to me as well. So how to find followers on Twitter. Again, these may somewhat translate to other social networks, but for now we'll focus strictly on Twitter. So number one, my number one top tip for getting followers is tweet, retweet, reply, repeat. Basically, you don't want to be all about you. You want to spread the voices coming out of your channel as best as you can, and you want to engage with the people on Twitter, those that are in your networks, those that are sort of adjacent to your networks. So you want to broadcast out your original thoughts and the things that you're doing, the things that you're thinking, the things that you're feeling occasionally. But I find that it's also useful for gaining followers if you start retweeting people. People that are higher followers than you is great. People from outside of your general network, if you're trying to like broaden things out, bring, sharing different views and opinions into your into your silo, the places that people are following you, and diversifying that can really help. The same with replying. If somebody's going out and saying they're having a hard time, or if they're excited about a project or finding, or some of the other things that people like to talk about online, whether it's fandoms, whether it's sports, go out and talk to those people as well. So I generally try and keep mine to less than 50% my own tweets, and trying to broadcast out and reply, retweet and reply about 50% of my content as well. So my thread, my feed is not just me, it's the broader community and things that I value outside of just what I have to say. So sharing your voice, and keep that up. And as you retweet people, as you reply to people, you engage with the people, you'll find that you'll start gathering followers as well, as people recognize that. Number two is hashtag jump in. Now is the time to join hashtags. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the world kind of hunkering down and staying home a lot more and more conferences, particularly this year, are jumping into digital formats. And some of these are going to be having big Twitter followings. So if you are an ecologist, you may have seen the ESA 2020 hashtag. There's conservation conferences ongoing right now online. There's the entomology meetings in the fall. Your discipline is probably transitioning at least a few of their meetings to a digital format. And along with those, the conversation that we would normally be having in the side hallways and in the talks themselves is jumping online, and usually is being coordinated through hashtags. So jump into hashtags, retweet people in the hashtags of the conferences that you're interested in, join them, add your voice to them to some degree. Again, kind of following that tweet, retweet, reply balance. And this is a great way to find people in your discipline, but also to connect and have other people see the things that you're talking about, who may not be totally connected, but are sort of following these free instances of conferences. The other thing about hashtags rather is that you can find community hashtags. So right now, this summer has seen a huge uptick of diversity initiatives using hashtags. Black AF in STEM is one, Black in chemistry, Black in geography I've seen, Black in neuroscience. So there's this whole way of finding community, whether it's hashtag women in STEM is another good one. So you can find communities outside of your discipline and outside of your focus, research focus, that you can also contribute to and help broadening out. This is where you're going to find more connections outside of your discipline, and that you can use to help broaden out the reach of your research beyond what you would normally get. Number three is a big one that I think this is a social part, is tag up and share down. And what I mean by that is when you are sharing something new, so tagging, sharing new papers, new ideas, maybe you're a photographer and you're sharing photos or various other things, whatever it is that you're putting out there broadcasting originally that you want people to know about, tag people, tell people about it. And generally you want to tag people who are a step or two ahead of you. So if you've got, say, 300 followers, you'll know people that would be interested potentially in that information that you're sharing. You can tag them either in a subsequent tweet or in a quote tweet saying, hey, look at this thing. And if you're at 300 followers and you tag somebody at 500, 800, and 1,000 followers, some of those people will start help building your networks. And if they retweet your stuff, they'll expose it to their networks, and then you'll start finding followers that way. Generally, when I say tag up, I don't mean tag huge accounts. But I think that's actually changing a little bit, because just in the last few weeks, we've seen a couple of celebrities coming out of the woodwork in strong support of scientific topics. Namely, MC Hammer is apparently a gigantic chemistry nerd and has been jumping into the chemistry Twitter in strong fashion, retweeting papers and talking about analyses and all sorts of stuff. And somebody like Diana Gabaldon, who is the author of the Outlander series, she's an ecologist by training, and so she often jumps into ecology threads and natural history threads and retweets those. So while I used to say don't tag too big, take a shot. You never know. And when I say share down, what that means is reach down. So as you move up and you gain more followers, what I try and do personally is to promote the people who have less followers than me more so than the people who have more followers. So when I'm doing retweets or sharing things or making sure that people have eyes on whether it's papers or whether it's blog posts or whether it's YouTube videos, people who have smaller followings than me, I try and promote in my following so that everybody gets a little bit of the slice of the pie that I'm building. So this cross pollination, this cross promotion of things and across networks can really help you grow. And this style of asking for help from people with larger followings than yours while simultaneously giving people who have smaller followers than yours access to your follower network can really, really help along the way and just provides a better community overall. Number 4 is something that's really I've only started talking about in the last few weeks, months, is because Twitter has really changed it, and it's called Get Listed. And Twitter's changed kind of the way that their algorithm is working, and they've really started to put a push on for lists. And lists are just basically curated groups around a topic of people. And so people can follow the list rather than following all the individual people on the topic, and they'll get the tweets from all the people who have been added to the list. So I maintain a list of entomologists. I think it's at about 1,100 entomologists at the moment from all around the world. But just in the last month and a half, 2 months, Twitter has been really promoting people to follow these, and they've been sliding these, hey, you should follow these lists into the timelines and everything. And so that list actually has about 1,200 followers now. So if you're just starting out and you want, instantly to have 1,200 followers, ask people who are maintaining these lists if you can be added to things that are of relevance to you. So if you're a soil biologist, go find a soil biology list somebody's maintaining. If you're an ecologist or an agricultural scientist, find the lists that are relevant to your research, jump into them, and the more people curate them and the more people find use in them and spend some time building them, the more followers everybody is getting this way. So it's a really interesting way. Now, that being said, finding and curating these things is kind of difficult. And I was trying to find lists that I could share with everybody here, and I'll have some that I'll tweet out around the time of this conference, so you can go out and find the list that I was talking about and join them or follow them yourselves. But there are big missing gaps. Like if you're a community ecologist, you could create a list of community ecologists on Twitter, and you would find some pretty useful things from that and probably start gaining followers just from making the list as people start following you, because as you're added to a public list, you get a notification as well. So this is another way. Build your own lists of relevance to what you're interested in and to what you're doing. And finally, the biggest thing, especially for grad students, I find, is to own your expertise. So grad students, we deal with a lot of imposter syndrome and feeling like we're inadequate or we have more to learn, and people don't really want to listen, or maybe they shouldn't listen to our voices because we have so much to do and there are so many more people above us in the academic framework who are, quote unquote, more respected, bigger ideas, all those things. But the truth of the matter is, you guys all know more about your subject than anybody else in the world. And you know a heck of a lot more about the general field of what you're doing than basically everybody else on the planet. And so even if you are not the most expert, you are still an expert. And when you get into social media and sharing that, don't lose sight of those qualifications that you're working hard at. And also maintain that your expertise, whatever that is, whether that's fandom, sports, all of these things are interconnected. You can be an expert in more than one of them and share them through your Twitter feed at any given time, and that will help provide a more humanizing effect for the people who are maybe outside of science to really connect with you over other parts of your interests. But own them. So, you don't want to be speculating on things that you're not comfortable on necessarily, but the things that you're comfortable in, join the discussion, join conversations about them, share research that you find exciting, and go out there and spread the word about what's going on in your field beyond just what you're doing, and help people realize why it is why you are so excited about the things that you do. So in that thread, I wanted to share some of the things that I've been doing on social media, a little bit as some examples of weird ways that social media can have effects. So now I'm a natural historian, I'm a taxonomist, systematist. I work with insects and specifically flies. And so I'm very interested in the ways that people are interacting with nature. And luckily for me, in Canada at least, nature is a very popular topic. So this is from the Canadian Nature Survey from almost a decade ago. I wish it was newer data because I think it would be even stronger. But just from 2012, 70% of Canadians say that they spend time outdoors to experience nature, while 50% of Canadians actively select where they live so they have access to nature. So they're taking that into consideration on living where they're living, whether that's in the city, whether it's like the cities themselves, the regions. They're taking nature into consideration. Almost all of those people are traveling to experience more and different nature, so they're putting money into getting out to see more nature. And 76% of Canadians are familiar with the term biodiversity, while 92% of them are familiar with the concept of species at risk. This means that we've got a great community of Canadians and Canadian residents who are interested in nature, are curious about nature, and who research or understand the value of maintaining and protecting it and learning more about it, which is exactly what I'm interested in. So with these people, and they've got a smartphone, almost all of them have got a smartphone in their pocket, which is able to connect to the internet, which has a phone, which has a GPS. It's the perfect collecting piece. People with a smartphone and a connection to Inaturalist or social media can share their observations and make massive changes to what we know about the biological world. As a taxonomist, of course, the things I'm going to talk about are new species. And here's a couple of examples of species that were discovered through social media. So here we have on the left a sundew plant, which was discovered on a Facebook post. Somebody from South America was out hiking and they shared this photo of this beautiful sundew on a Facebook botany plant post group, and the taxonomist came along and said, that's new. They went out, joined an expedition, joined the person who had found the original post, and they all joined together, found the specimens, took them back. Same thing happened with the cricket on the right. Somebody posted a photo of it to Facebook. The taxonomists who were specialists in that taxa saw it, went out, picked them up, helped get them collected, brought them back and described them. Again, Instagram, another example. Here on the left, you have a robber or a dance fly that was discovered on Instagram. And on the right, you have a fungus that lives on millipedes. So it's not the millipede itself that they discovered, but rather a little tiny fungus, and I'll point out where it is in a second, that they saw via a Twitter post. So this Twitter post, I'm going to go into a little bit more. This is Derek Hennon, Dr. Derek Hennon. He recently got his PhD from University of Virginia or Virginia Tech. I can't remember. Anyways, he's a millipede specialist. He's awesome. He's a great sci-commer. If you're into insects and natural history, definitely follow at Derek Hennon for all the wholesome natural history that you could ever want. And what he was doing here in this example is he was rewarding people who said that they voted in one of the elections a couple of years ago with photos of millipedes that he was working on, basically just as a way to get people to vote and to share the research he's doing in a different way. So great way to get followers, great way to get excitement going. And as it turns out, the millipede that he shared in this picture has two tiny little dots on it that are apparently a brand new species of fungus that lives parasitically on millipedes. So those two tiny dots drew the attention of a fungus taxonomist who was scrolling through Twitter, saw them, I don't know how, and recognized them for what they were. Went back to their collection, found more, and then described this. So this is a species. The species name of this is actually Twitter eye. So very exciting stuff. Now, social media is one thing. We can, chance upon interesting things if we're following the right people or, participating in the right groups. But if we want to take this to the next level, that's where iNaturalist comes in. And iNaturalist is a website, social network that's set up by California Academy of Sciences and the National Geographic Society. And it's basically a clearinghouse for interested and curious naturalists to post pictures and observations that are then able to be identified and logged and georeferenced and all the things. It's basically becoming a digital natural history collection very, very rapidly. So in Canada already in the last 5 or 10 years, there have been 2.2 million natural history observations made by almost 60,000 amateur naturalists just in Canada. The numbers worldwide are massive, and it's growing year after year. So in Canada, this means that in 2019 alone, so this is just 2019, almost 300,000 terrestrial arthropods, so that means insects, spiders, the little creepy, crawly, hard things that we generally consider the bugs. Anyways, they made almost 300,000 observations. About half of them were moths, and a lot of them, surprisingly, were identified to species. And so you can see on the right in the green chart there, the darkest green, that's research grade. That means somebody has agreed with somebody else on the species identification. That ends up totaling up to about almost 6,500 different species out of the 44,000 species of terrestrial arthropods, so about 50%. So in 1 year, community naturalists in Canada found and recorded and identified about 15% of Canada's total arthropod diversity, which is a remarkable number and a massive trend. This is something that I'm working on right now, moving forward, is kind of diving into this more and what these numbers mean for Canadian biodiversity and taxonomy and systematics research. So I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I want to give you another example that's specifically about SES. So in 2017, I was teaching a course, the intro entomology course, SES. Oh, what is it now? SES 3090. Well, Dr. Marshall was on sabbatical, and I was teaching, and I had a student bring in this really cute little bug on the right there, bright red, toy stab, and she said that she found it in her backyard in Etobicoke, and she had posted it onto Inaturalist and had worked through and figured out what it was, and that it was the European firebug, pyrochorus apteris. Well, it turns out this is the first time that bug had ever been found in Canada. There had been records in a very, very, very old record in New Jersey that probably didn't establish, and the bug had become established in Utah. But in Canada, it had never been seen before. And so she had posted this, and the only record of it was her posts on iNaturalist. So during the course of her lab segment, she ended up writing this paper and submitting it before she finished her final exam that year. So major props. Before she even graduated, she had a major paper submitted recording this, and I helped her out with it. But iNaturalist is great, and she wrote something really, really astute in the final paragraph. So here is the 2017 data, and this is what Paula wrote in her paper. Considering the species' versatility and hardiness, it is unsurprising that it has become established in Ontario. Its flightlessness may limit its spread, but individuals may be transported unwittingly along with ornamental plants, soil, or even leaf litter. Nevertheless, they are conspicuous insects that can be easily noticed by the keen gardener, and with tools such as iNaturalist, amateur naturalists can assist in keeping track of their range in natural history. Now, she wrote this back in 2018, and that is absolutely what has transpired. As you could see as I was reading that, the records of this have spread out from her original finding in the Etobicoke region and have now taken over basically all of the GTA. This is a species that lives primarily on rows of Sharon plants and various other backyard mallow plants. And so it's a pest that is, well, it's not really a pest. It doesn't reach that level. It's more of a nuisance and something that they congregate in large numbers. They're bright red. They're going to get attention from people. But it's something that people started noticing more and more and more after Paula brought attention to it. And what's interesting is just after Paula's paper was published, the species on the left here, the box tree moth, was discovered on the other side of Toronto. And the box tree moth is a species from Asia that has moved into Europe and is now eating ornamental shrubs at an alarming rate there, and has now been found in Toronto doing the same thing, and it is equally spreading across the GTA. And the one on the right, the elm zigzag sawfly, this is trace evidence. Nobody's found the specimen yet, but this is literally from just around the corner from my house in Quebec, that an amateur naturalist found this, posted it on iNaturalist just a couple of weeks ago, and the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, is now actively going out in this area to keep an eye on it to try and find the specimen to confirm it, because this is another potential pest of elms, which, if you're familiar with Dutch elm disease, elms are not doing so great in eastern Canada right now. So we don't need another introduced pest contributing to that. So this is the ways that I've been kind of contributing to social media, and I've got other stories, and all sorts of weird stuff has happened as a result of me sharing my research and my interest in insects on social media. But I want to tell you about a story that's beyond just the media side, of social media, which is what we're talking about here with the photos and the images and the taking data out for research purposes, but more along the lines of the social side of social media. So a couple of years ago, while I was helping out with the Entomological Society of Canada's Twitter feed, we had a woman reach out to the ESC whose daughter was being bullied by her classmates. Her young daughter was in grade 1, and she was being bullied by her classmates. And so she asked for us to send out a tweet, or to ask for basically an entomologist, a professional entomologist, to write her an email and just say, you know, it's cool to like bugs. Keep up. You don't have to be bullied. We ended up sending it out as a tweet to try and get support, and attach the Bugs Are for Girls hashtag to it, which we created for this. And what happened is it went viral. I sent this out, and over the next course of the week and a half, thousands of people responded and retweeted, and it started building into this whole thing. And people started sending messages to Sophia, the little girl who was being bullied, from all over the world. Entomologists, women in entomology, women in other sciences, sharing their experiences and their support for what she was facing and for her love of bugs. And we received hundreds and hundreds of messages, and she still gets emails to this day. I'm still forwarding messages to her constantly from people who are coming across her story. But these are sort of the terms that people were sharing with Sophia as this was going on, and it made a huge difference for her as she was going through this, and it gave her the strength to push through the bullying and to recognize that what she was doing was really cool, and that entomology is absolutely, and bugs are absolutely for girls. So this is me. I met up with her in the summer. We went and collected bugs for a little bit in the backyard. We hung out, talked about insects. Great story. And then in the fall, I got asked to write a paper about it. And I invited Sophia to join me on the paper as well. And so at the age of, I think this time she was 8, she published her first peer-reviewed paper alongside me in the Annals of Entomological Society of America. Now, what happened next is the paper and the story got even bigger and went even further viral. And it got picked up by news outlets all around the world. It was published on like the front page of some obscure Italian newspaper. Sophia was on like Good Morning America and the Today Show, and we were interviewed on NPR's All Things Considered, like huge. It was on CBC radio, everywhere. And so this got even bigger, and it made a bigger splash, and more people got involved with it, and we started hearing back more and more stories of women and girls who had been bullied out of science, whether by classmates, by friends, by family, by researchers, the entire gamut. People who had faced adversity to get and follow their passions. And this has had a massive positive effect. One of the other things that's come of this actually is that Sophia wrote a book, a children's book, telling her own story, and this was just published in February, and you can purchase it now, and telling the story of herself and her way through the bullying and finding a way. And it's a lovely children's story, and I encourage you to give it a look, especially if you have young kids in your life who may want to learn more about bugs or be interested in that. So this is the ways that social media can have an effect. You can get data from it and publish papers on it. You can make an effect and find community and inspire community to follow in your footsteps or the footsteps of people who you have modeled. You can find trust and relationships in that and build trust and relationships online that will help support you through the process of grad school. And all of these things are possible because of the tiny little phone in our pocket that we can connect to anybody at any time from our front porch or otherwise. So I want to say thank you to those that are organizing the conference for inviting me. I hope this has been helpful and useful. If you'd like to follow me, you can follow me at BioInFocus on Twitter. Or if you're on Inaturalist, I encourage you to join me there as well. If you have any questions, you can definitely send them to me on Twitter or by email. I think my email is around as well. And I'll see you online. Thank you.